Well, thank you. Yesterday I finished my lectures, so today it's a talk that has nothing to do with my lectures. And I wanted to talk about one of the last works I've been doing, but I will be reviewing a previous work I did on conformal anomalies. This has clear relation with ADS-CFT, but then the second part is really my recent paper with two collaborators. In fact, my collaborators on that last paper are Jordan François and Serge Lazzarini. Jordan is in Mons now, and Serge Lazzarini is in Marseille on the CPT. But so, as I said, I will review what I did some years ago with Weil anomaly, because all the techniques that I have been using in that classification of Weil anomalies, I use them for the classification of conformal invariants. Okay. Good, so let's go. Introduction. In 1973, so Kepler and Duff discovered that invariance in the binary scaling of the metric for some system, classical field theory for massless fields in interaction with gravity, that this invariance of the classical action doesn't no longer survive in the quantum theory. So that was the discovery of Weil anomaly. That is called sometimes conformal, interchangeably. Some examples of such systems of massless fields coupled to gravity. You have Maxwell coupled to gravity, then massless spinors in arbitrary dimensions, or you have the conformally coupled scalars. But when nobody has a point already, okay, no problem, I continue. Good. With the usual conformal coupling. So for the notation, since you are there, so Riemann tensor, Christoffel, and you know these symbols for the Ricci and the scalar curvature with this calligraphic R, not to confuse them with the matrix valued the two forms. R for the curvature form. So acting indices denote the tension, the frame, and for Dirac spinor, but in fact I will not discuss spinor, so that will be beyond Okay. So these matter systems coupled to gravity, they are invariant under these local transformations. They are gauge transformations. Omega is a function, arbitrary positive function, maybe on space-time. And that's the way that all the fields that are in the previous slides, they transform. This symmetry is reflected in the tracelessness of the corresponding stress tensor. So you really have the Noether identities related to this symmetry that is given by the stresslessness. And by construction, these actions, they are invariant under diffeomorphism. It's really matter systems coupled to arbitrary background. So the local symmetries, one has diffeomorphism and local Weil scaling of metric and fields. Okay. So it turns out that after regularization, both of these symmetries cannot survive at the same time. And since we like to keep diffeomorphism, then the Weil anomaly appears and is obtained as the trace of the regularized stress tensor that is no longer zero. So they are sometimes called conformal anomalies, as I said, but also trace anomalies for that reason. So just a little bit of words, how we go to there. So in field theory, start with the genetic function of Green's function, and then of connected Green's function, then of one particular irreducible Green's function, is gamma. And an anomaly in quantum field theory is when the effective action can be made invariant under arbitrary infinite transformations that will keep in the classical action invariant. And they cannot be made invariant by a suitable choice of local counterterms. So an anomaly, to lowest order in H-bar, is the variation of the effective action under this infinitesimal transformation that will keep in the classical action invariant. And it is a genuine anomaly if it cannot be written as the infinitesimal variation of some local functional C. Because if it were the case, then you could eliminate this anomaly by a local counterterm in the classical action. Interesting, it goes back to the beginning. Okay. So since an anomaly is a variation, it cannot be arbitrary, but it has to satisfy some consistency, some integrability condition, analogous to the integrability condition rotational of f, which a gradient has to satisfy. So an anomaly has to satisfy what are called the Wess-Zumino consistency condition. Wess and Zumino spelled that out in 71.
Sorry, so is there like S, the infinitesimal parameter?
No, I call S the infinitesimal variation.
Yeah.
Because later on, S will be the BST differential.
Nice.
The data state, I use
But this
I
what
use the same
physicists
method.
would call like a delta or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So delta is more standard, but since very quickly we adopt the BRST formulation, I keep the same letter, but same. Indeed, so this analysis of Wess-Zumino consistency condition is more elegant and simplifies in the Bequet-Westor-Rathutine formulation, where one introduces a ghost for each gauge parameter, and ghost in the sense that this quantity transforms in the same way as the gauge parameters under the Lorentz group, but they have the opposite Grossman statistics. So one then suitably defines the transformations also of the ghosts, so that this operation is nilpotent. That was very helpful, and that's still very useful for local quantum field theory. So then, the Wess-Zumino consistency condition is this simple form, where it's important to know in which space one works. So the functionals A and C are both local functionals. It means that they are integral over space-time of some densities that depend on the fields and their derivatives, but derivatives only up to a certain order. That order can be arbitrary. In fact, effective actions can be described in that way. So you can have arbitrarily many derivatives, but this expansion must be controlled by some parameter. And then in this space we can work, and that's where I will be working. Okay. And S is called the BST differential. Okay, now solution of the Wess-Zumino consistency condition. So is that since this is the general, the modern definition of an anomaly, we may want to solve the Wess-Zumino consistency condition in a general way, just to have the generic structure of the anomalies, of course, without knowing the coefficients that come in front of the structure. This depends on the field content of the model that you take, and to compute them, you have to do regularization, you have to do this kind of computations. But it's first thing to do already is to know what are the possible candidate anomalies for the model builders, then to look and compute, and they know what they have to obtain as an anomaly. So determining the general solution of the Wess-Zumino consistency condition amounts to computing the cohomology of the BST differential in the space of local functionals with ghost number 1. It's a cohomology because we have to find a cocycle. It was good. The first facts. I shouldn't touch.
It's because you're not thinking.
It's good.
Yeah, move it up.
At what position? Sorry. Okay, so it's a cohomological problem. Just means that some quantity is closed under an operation, and it cannot be exact. And mathematicians have given a name to this kind of problems. It's a cohomology problem. Okay, good. So now, since we work in local quantum field theory, we can look at the integrand for the functional, and then the condition translates into this field, where we accept some total derivative. So we assume that fields go to infinity, go to 0 at infinity, or that you work on a compact manifold. Okay, well, so the total external derivative is defined like that. So one has this relation, the potency of S, and then that S and D anti-commute.
Sorry, I am a little bit lost. So if we manage, if A is the integral of A1n,
yeah.
Is this equivalent to say that we could remove it with a finite number of counter terms? Or
No, so that's the anomaly. Okay, so that's important that the anomaly is the variation of the non-local quantum functional gamma. So gamma is non-local,
right?
But its variation to first order is local. It's a theorem. It's a fact. So the anomaly itself is a function. It's a local functional. So it can be written as the integral of a local density.
I may confuse. So before you said what was the condition for that, for us not to be able to remove that? by local contour terms?
Is that if this animal there
Yes.
is itself the variation of another local functional,
Oh, I see. So it
Then-
shouldn't be the variation.
exactly.
Beautiful. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
So it should not be SC. I see.
Exactly, no, I can keep it there. So A is S of gamma,
Ah,
so this
of
is
course.
local,
Yeah.
this is non-local, but this equality happens to be true. And A, so if A happens to be the S of some other local functional,
Right.
then it is trivial. Then
Of course.
A is trivial.
Because you could add minus C to the action and that's it.
Exactly, because then you take your classical action and you can add probably minus H bar this C,
Right.
and then you get rid of this.
But
Okay, so now there's a game that one plays with this kind of equation. So if you act on this equation with the differential S, so the first term drops out because S is nilpotent, then you have S and D, but S and D anti-commute. So you have D of this quantity that is 0 by virtue of this equation. And then one uses the algebraic Poincare lemma to deduce that this guy here is D exact, which we have in this box. Then you see that you have the same equation as above, but one unit of form degree below. The superscript there denotes the form degree of the quantities. And then you can do the same game, apply S again on this equation.
so to use the Poincare lemma, you are assuming something about the target space, I guess.
Okay, so that's why it's algebraic Poincare lemma, so it's not the standard Poincare lemma. No, so this I cannot, I don't have time to explain. It's a bit more complicated. I mean, you work in an infinite dimensional space of the jet space of the fields and all their derivatives, but there is completely the equivalent of the usual Poincare lemma that you know for functions on space-time. This also exists for functionals, in fact for densities. But so believe me that I can apply, this is true. Actually, this D is not the Durham, it's the horizontal differential, because it acts on the fields and all derivatives as if the fields and all the derivatives were themselves coordinates of an infinite dimensional space-time. And X mu are also part of this big space, but so the bundle is quite bigger. But you have the same theorem, but we call it algebraic Poincare lemma. I mean, mathematicians derived that in the 70s, and we are using that all the time in local quantum field theory. Okay. So then, doing that, we derive what is called the descent equations that terminates either because you meet a zero form. So if Q happens to be N, then a zero form cannot be D of something. Or it may happen that in that game, you meet at some point a quantity there, which is strictly positive form degree, but that is a co-cycle of S. This may happen. And if Q is 0, the descent is called trivial, because it boils down to, you can redefine it to only the first term. So then this gentleman, so Michel de Velay, Talon and Vialet, they are mostly mathematicians, mathematical physics, and you can frame all these things in a fancy way, which I will not do. But in order to find your candidate anomaly there, the game is to start from the bottom of the descent instead of trying to attack from the top. So first try to find those co-cycles of S that can be lifted all the way up to an N form. And that's a well-defined problem, and the tools in homological perturbation theory have been developed for that, so it's nice, it's very well-defined. So that's indeed a homological consideration. So for the history, Von Neurath, Cotta, Avosino, Reiner, Pasty, and Brekeler, they started to apply homological consideration for the Weyl anomaly in the 80s, without, although using this technique of descent equations, that in fact were derived independently by the three authors, Dubov-Velay, Talon, and Vialet. So they didn't know these results, and they worked, I mean, they wrote all the possible kind of candidates that they could be, hard computations, and they found that the candidate Weyl anomalies can be, the Euler term of the manifold is a candidate Weyl anomaly, so the Euler term multiplied by the Weil ghost, which is the ghost for the local Weil transformations. So this is a candidate, and they found also that strictly Weil invariant scalar densities multiplied by the Weil ghost are also candidate Weil invariants. And in fact, Kepler and Duff, when they computed, when they found the Weil anomaly, it was in 4 dimensions, and precisely these are the two terms that they found in 4 dimensions: square the Weil tensor and the Euler term. So where this W indeed is a conformally invariant Weil tensor, it's a traceless part of the Riemann tensor. Then later, and using a given precise regularization scheme, which is dimensional regularization, there's Adam Schwimmer confirmed the structure obtained by Bonora and his collaborators. So they confirmed that the Euler term arises, and they called it type A Weil anomaly, and all the others called type B. So from the structure of the poles in the variation of gamma, the effective action, they observed that the type A, so Euler terms multiplied by Weil ghost, it appears in a similar way to the non-abelian chiral anomaly in Yang-Mills gauge theory. So therefore, they conjectured that the type A anomaly should arise via some descent equations. But they couldn't find the descent equation for the anomalies. So now, let's start a bit more technical, how to solve the Vesuvian consistency condition by this technique of descent equation. So what we have at our disposal is the field is the Weil ghost, in fact, in all its derivatives, the diffeomorphism ghost and all its derivatives. So by definition, they have ghost number 1. Here are the BST transformations of all the fields in the problem, so the metric and the ghost. So so SW and SD, they implement the Weil transformation and the diffeomorphism transformation. So we have these two local symmetries, if you remember. But then we can split the Vesuvian consistency condition for the anomaly with respect to the degree in the Weil ghost. And if you do that, you find these two equations. Notice that so these equations there are called the co-cycles equation, and this equation is called the co-boundary. Good. Then a trick that Stohra, in fact, Stohra and Zumino were the first to develop this method of descent equations for the chiral anomaly or Adle-Badin anomalies. And Stohra added, so he put together the basic differential plus the horizontal differential, D, to make a new quantity S, which is a bit hybrid, because it has one piece that raises the ghost number by 1 unit and doesn't touch the form degree, and another piece that doesn't touch the ghost number, but raises the form degree by 1 unit. Then, okay, he added that together, and he showed that the problem of classifying the anomalies amounts to classifying the invariant under this differential, so with respect to the diffeomorphism invariant part, so that's the statement that now I apply to my problem, the problem I considered of Weil anomaly. So for this problem, the problem is the same as computing this cohomology, where again, this quantity now that I denote by a Greek letter is a hybrid quantity in the sense that it contains quantities which have form degree and ghost number which are different, but such that the sum of the form degree plus the ghost number is fixed. So it's a reformulation, and there are many names going behind that, like the Russian formula that you may have heard. And then using very general results obtained by Friedman Brandt in this Communication in Mathematical Physics of '96, what we know is that the solution of this problem, which is the problem of the Vesuvian consistency condition, has a very general form, even like this, where here we have the Weil ghost that appears. This quantity I will explain, they are generalized connection, and these are tensor fields. But for any symmetry, the result of Friedman Brandt, I'll tell you that it must be of that form. But for the problem at hand, where we have Weil and diffeomorphism, I determine this space, and the space tau of tensor is generated by the metric together with tensors that start with the Weil tensor, the first Weil covariant derivative of the Weil tensor, and then a whole tower of quantity where I made appear, I constructed this operator this commutator is no longer the Riemann tensor, like for the Joule-Levi-Civita covariant derivative, but instead of the Riemann, you have the Weil tensor that appears, plus the Cotton tensor. So this derivative actually is the Weil covariant derivative, in the sense that its curvature that gives you the field strength is indeed the field strength for conformal geometry. Because these two quantities, they are zero if and only if your manifold is conformally flat. Okay, so Weil tensor is decomposed, as I said, it's the traceless part of the Riemann, so it's Riemann minus its trace, but it's useful to use this tensor, which is called the Scarton tensor, which is essentially to scale the Ricci corrected by a trace of the Ricci tensor. And then this quantity, the generalized connections for the problem that I studied, there are a bunch of them, so this index n goes over all these values. When you have the Weil ghost, the Axelrod differential, this GLN ghost obtained by the Christoffel valued one forms. And then this is the derivative of the Weil ghost, shifted by, so this has ghost number 1, you see, in form degree 0, and it has another piece which is the Scouten one form. So P is the Scouten tensor. That piece has ghost number 0, but form degree 1. So you see that all these quantities are homogeneous in the total degree. So they have total degree 1, because either they are form degree 1 and ghost 0, or ghost number 1 and form degree 0. Okay, so now the result of the analysis for the Weil anomaly, I will skip the details, it's not so important, but for the slides for those who want to be available. Just the point is that applying these techniques, and I skipped many details of the theorem, is that what you find is that the top form degree of this quantity alpha defined there. So I first define some set of quantities, which are local total forms. Then I sum them up, then there is another one, this beta, whatever, it's important. The point is that from this, I extract the only anomaly that satisfies a non-trivial descent of the equation. Of course, up to addition of trivial terms, and an anomaly satisfying trivial descent. And then if you add these two quantities before, you find that it's nothing but the Euler density of the space-time multiplied by the Weil ghost. Whereas the anomaly, the piece beta alone, happens to be a type B anomaly. It's a contraction of product of Weil tensors. So it obeys a trivial descent equation. Okay, so that's the theorem. So that holds in arbitrary dimension. I don't give you the details, but all the structure of the descent equation are encapsulated in these guys, in these tensors. So you can split the solution. This equation can be split with respect to the form degree, and that gives you that gives rise to a whole descent of equations. And that was a technique that was introduced by Storra and Zumino. Okay. So then that solved the problem of the general classification of the Weil anomalies in arbitrary dimension. By the way, byproduct of that is the anomaly can only appear in even dimensions, because it was known from previous techniques of regularization. But here it's a result of the cohomology, that the cohomology is empty in odd space-time dimension, only in even. So you recuperate things that people knew, but from purely algebraic point of view. And what is important, it's independently of any regularization scheme. You don't want a classification of anomaly to depend on what is the classification scheme, the regularization scheme that you have taken. It should not be a classification. And in arbitrary dimension. And so I could prove that type A Weil anomaly is the unique one that satisfies the non-trivial descent equations. Okay, so now I go to another problem for which I don't have maybe you, if you can help, physical motivation, but that's very similar to the first one. So the point is that conformal anomalies are related to global conformal invariance. So the people by Deser and Schwimmer triggered the interest of geometers, of people working in conformal geometry, because they could see these results, and they observed that the Weil anomalies, conformal anomalies, actually if you strip out of the Weil parameter for Weil summation, they are global conformal invariant. So global conformal invariant, they are given by the integral of the manifold of linear combination of strictly Weyl invariant scalar densities, like the square of the Weyl tensor in 4 dimensions, with square root of minus g in front. Combination of that with scalar densities that are only invariant on the Weyl rescaling up to a total derivative. So that's the definition of global conformal invariant. So they were asking what is the general structure of a global conformal invariant. And so they thought that this was the same as the problem of the Weyl anomaly. And so they started to work on that, stimulated by the paper by Deser and Schwimmer. In fact, these global conformal invariants motivation is that they are relevant for deformations of Weyl invariant Lagrangian densities. So if you want a theory of gravity where all fields are massless, suppose at very high energy, you can consider that all matter fields are massless, then usually you have Weyl invariance that appears on top of diffeomorphism invariant. So there are motivations in physics also for this problem, but maybe you can tell me there are others that I have not seen. Okay, so again, and I will go more quickly. The point is that the classification of global invariance is also a cohomological problem. It can also be rephrased in these forms. In the sense that first you ask the invariant to be local again, so you go to the density instead of the functional, and you want the density to be invariant under the density differential, which is given by the sum of the diffeomorphism plus Weyl BST differentials. So, and you want to solve that, because that's a rephrasing of the problem of the global invariant. On the other hand, the local conformal invariants, they are the integrals of scalar densities that are strictly Weyl invariant and not up to a total derivative. These ones, they can be built using various techniques, be them algebraic, so I developed some tools with this covariant derivative D I mentioned before, or geometric tools, and there is a whole community in tractor calculus who are doing that. But then the global invariants, these ones are scalar densities, as I said, that are invariant only up to a total derivative. So we know that they should produce non-trivial descent equations. And indeed, so that's a descent equation that, for the again, can stop either at form degree 0 or before. And so the problem that we studied with Jordan, François, and Serge Lazzarini was to solve now this cohomological problem, now at ghost number 0. For something for a local functional that depends only on the metric and its derivatives, not on the ghost. Again, one can decompose the first equation with respect to the Weyl ghost number. And so we see that the global invariants should be quantities that make sense to integrate, because under the diffeomorphism part, they are cocycles, total derivative. So they will give you local densities that are the scalar densities that you can integrate on a manifold to give a true scalar. And they are also invariant, they should also be invariant under the Weyl part up to a total derivative. It's kind of equivalent cohomology problem. You work in the space of densities with respect to diffeomorphism, and on top of that you add the requirement of Weyl invariant. So it's against a cohomological group. It cannot be exact in the sense that it cannot be a total derivative of the manifold. But now it has ghost number 0. So before this group was for anomalies, ghost number 0 in top form degree, and now we have still top form degree but ghost number 0. So they are two different cohomological groups, and indeed they are very different. The mathematicians actually believe that by classifying the global conformal invariants, namely these, they would give a one-to-one, it would give all the Weyl anomalies. Actually, those two groups, as it happens, as we found, are very different, and they don't have the same dimension in particular. Okay. Good. So the mathematician Spiros Alexakis actually was a PhD student of Pfefferman in Princeton when he worked on that problem. I think that was probably the problem that Pfefferman gave him for his PhD study thesis. So this program gave rise to several long papers that he published, and that culminated with a monograph in the Annals of Mathematics Studies, a prestigious series at Princeton University Press in 2012 for the problem of classifying global conformal invariants. But here we wanted to study that with our tools from physics, from local quantum field theory, purely algebraic. These people are geometers, so they don't want really to do algebra, they don't want to discuss about cohomology. But of course, they develop many very useful tools in differential geometry, and a very good example is the paper by Pfefferman and Graham, where they of course did things which are extremely useful for physics. As usual, when you do interesting mathematics, the GY is extremely useful. Yeah.
Something I was confused about. These invariants you're looking for, can I think of them as related to also some conformal invariant differential equation? And they are, like what? Like some higher order or lower order conformal invariant differential equation? I know
that's right.
Some of them that's true, but is it true?
That's why you have in mind the Yamabe problem,
Yeah.
The operator. Yes, it is related. In that case, it's not differential operators, conformal covariant operator acting on scalar fields, like for the Yamabe problem, but he acting on the metric.
Yeah.
And that's right. So it's
These are tensorial invariants in general.
Exactly.
But you can have things like the Cotton tensor at one, for instance, case, right?
Yeah, so some global, well, in the local conformal, so in the strictly Weyl invariant densities, which are called the local conformal invariants, what you find are quantities which are Weyl tensor. I used W, and then in dimension given of dimensionality, you can have invariants that starts like that, plus corrections that start with a quadratic part, where here typically you have the D'Alembertien, and here the four indices are contracted with the four indices there. And so that the problem of classifying all these quantities is indeed can be rephrased as the problem of computing an operator that acts on the Weyl tensor and with higher order corrections, such that this quantity is strictly invariant when you multiply by the square root of minus g. That quantity under the Weyl transformation should be a 0. Yeah.
So these are powers of the Laplacian.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So you could rewrite that as something like I don't know, some other symbol, I don't know, to make it this power W. That just define this quantity there. It starts with the D'Alembertien to a given power plus corrections. Exactly. Okay. Good. So, as I said first, one has to find the cocycle. So let's look first at this equation for cocycles of the diffeomorphism part. The good point is that this cohomology has already been worked out with a lot of rigor, not by mathematicians, but by physicists. The same Friedmann-Brandt I was mentioning, Dragon and Kreutzer in '89, and then later even refined with less assumptions by Glenn Varnish, same Friedmann-Brandt and Mark Eno in '95. So that's a good piece of news. I wanted to use what is already available on the market. Now a bit of notation. So we denote by Fk the characteristic polynomials, so the invariant polynomials of the Lorentz algebra, and by Q the corresponding Chern-Simons forms that are redefined like that. So the general solution of the first equation above decomposes into two main classes. These are the results that I'm now summarizing of these people. So class 1 is that you have the scalar densities that depend on the Riemann tensor, all its covariant derivative, the metric, and you can take the dual, you can extract the top form, plus class 2. These ones are a bit more complicated to describe, but essentially they are obtained from polynomials in the characteristic or invariant polynomials of the Lorentz algebra, where you take this derivative, you replace one characteristic polynomial by its Chern-Simons form. And I cannot explain that, but it's related to the Lie algebra cohomology of the Lorentz group, dimension n. And indeed, so this second class contributes only for spacetimes of this dimensionality, because it's related to the invariant tensors of the Lorentz algebra, for which the curvature is the curvature 2 form is antisymmetric. So you can have only traces of these curvature 2 forms with an even power of this curvature 2 form. So just for a definite example, take n equals 7, something like that. Then the second class gives you two independent structures. One is given by the usual Lorentz-Simons density that you know for this objective Templeton. I mean the gamma d gamma plus 2/3 gamma cube wedge product with the trace of R squared. So that's the first structure that you have. And then the second structure that you have is the Lorentz-Simons in 7 dimensions, which is this trace of the I7, and I7 is given by that. Of course, you have formula for that. You have homotopy formulas, transgression formula to give you this in arbitrary dimensions. And gamma here, so it denotes the metric valued one form for the Christoffel symbol, whose components are the Christoffel symbols. Trace is the matrix trace. For example, trace of R squared just means that. It's a 4 form, and I don't write the wedge product. I will never write explicitly the wedge product. Okay. How long? 20 minutes. Ah, okay. Well, good. We will be able to go to lunch before. Good news for you. Okay. So if I speed it, but please so interrupt when you want. But fine. Okay. Now the result that we obtained. Statement of the result. Okay. So define this again local total form. So I will not repeat, but all the same techniques, the Stora trick of adding together the BSD differential with the total differential D. This we do. You rephrase the problem, the original problem, into a problem in a space of local total forms, which are some of forms of definite degree plus quantities which is definite ghost number, such as the sum of the form degree plus the ghost number is fixed. So you work in that place, in that space, you use all kind of techniques of homological perturbation theory, which are very firm, very solid, established by mathematicians in the field of homological perturbation theory, that people like Talon, Dubois-Viollet, Marquenot have imported for physics, for local quantum field theory. So using these techniques, the result I present in the form of 3 lemmas. So the first one is that you construct these quantities, never mind the details, then from these quantities psi, we computed this phi now. It turns out that these guys, this coefficient, if you sum them up here, again split into alpha and beta, like I was doing for the Weyl anomaly, they satisfy the Vesuvian consistency condition for global conformal invariance. Both alpha and beta solve them. So for the invariance, the global invariance of class 1, you know class 1 were usual Lagrangian densities that we have in field theory for gravity. So in this class, it turns out that the top form degree component of this alpha, it satisfies the co-cycle condition for conformal invariance. And it gives rise to a non-trivial descent in the cohomology of S modulo D. On the other hand, the invariant beta, it satisfies a trivial descent, and indeed it's obtained by taking contractions of products of Weyl tensor. Again, you add alpha and beta together, you take the top form degree, it's nothing but the Euler density of the manifold. And so that was obtained by Alexakis in his many papers and in his book. That was the main result. That global conformal invariance in arbitrary even dimension for him were given only by the Euler density of the manifold. So that's what we find also. We recover his result that it is the only conformal invariance of class 1 that satisfies, and here in our language, we discuss about the length of the descent and all these techniques that I don't want to bother you about, but it's the only one. Okay, but then there was something else that actually was missed in the studies by the mathematician now. If you now define other quantities there that are built essentially from this matrix, matrix valued quantity. You see, it's a mixed stuff. So this is the curvature 2 form, viewed as a matrix. And that's a 1 form, but multiplied by this quantity, omega. So this is 1 form, sorry, this is a 0 form, but ghost number 1. This is a 1 form, but of ghost number 0, so that the total form degree of this part is 2. In this piece is a 2 form, it's curvature 2 form, so it has ghost number 0, but form degree 2, so the total degree of this is indeed 2 is homogeneous. So this quantity is the main ingredient to build this alpha, And so you take this sum, you see that it's something which mixes undifferentiated Christoffel symbols with curvature 2 forms, and it has ghost number to the game. So you add them all together from this index M1 to 2p. That gives you such a quantity that solves the Wassermann consistency condition there, up to the failure, if you want, which is nothing but the chain class of the trace of the curvature 2 form for the Lorentz algebra to this power 2p. So it's even power, so it's non-trivial quantity. If it in odd power, it would be identically 0. But now from this, we have access by opening the equation by splitting it with respect to the form degree, which is the trick that Stora introduced, and it's called the Russian formula. Now, if we do that, that gives you, it gives rise to a descent equations on top form degree. In fact, the degree n plus 1, so n is space-time dimension. So you act with D, so you are in space, you are in the universal envelope algebra, if you wish, above the form degree of your space-time. You have the usual relation between the Chern-Simons P form and the symmetric polynomial of chain class, which is above. But then below that, you have this whole chain of equations, where this one shows you that the Lorentz Chern-Simons for in dimension 4p minus 1 is indeed a candidate for global conformal invariant. So it is a scalar density. In fact, under diffeomorphism, it transforms with a total derivative. And on top of that, the Wien transformation is also invariant up to a total derivative. And this total derivative cannot be removed. It's a non-trivial quantity, and that gives rise to this whole descent of equations. Okay. Then something that we observed in this chain of equation is at this level there. This equation there is nothing but the consistency condition for a Weyl anomaly, so it has ghost number 1, in a manifold of codimension 1. So it's an n-1 form. And it solves the Wassermann consistency condition. So this guy cannot be written as S exact modulo D, otherwise, if it were, all the terms below would have been absorbed. But the result that we have done is that this descent here is the shortest descent that you obtain from the top. So it cannot be, all these guys cannot be redefined away by trivial terms. So it's generally a non-trivial Weyl anomaly. And I don't have any interpretation for that. So if one of you here has something as an idea, could tell you if it is interesting or not, that could be nice for me. So, as I said, you start with in a manifold which has dimensions n, and take n to be of the form 4p minus 1. Then, in a submanifold, so in manifold of codimension 1, there is here, we have candidate for Weyl anomalies. And since we know all these terms, all these are fully known, I just wrote what is this quantity, this one. It looks like that. So, if you have something that could be useful for that quantity, that isn't that. Maybe it shows up for some CFT on the boundary of a manifold, this manifold being of dimension 4p minus 1. So okay, it's quite rather specific, but that's a result. Okay, finally, you also have descent equations associated with, so in the class 2, what I call class 2 of scalar densities for diffeomorphism, so we found the Lorentz and Simons forms, but you can also take the wedge product of these with characteristic polynomials, the Lorentz algebra, this, I denoted this Fk. And k goes from 1 up to the rank of the Lorentz algebra. So these guys will, again, they will in fact satisfy exactly the same descent, so it will have the same length as the descent obeyed by the Lorentz and Simons, because basically these blocks there, they are totally spectator for both for D, for the total differential D, and for the Weyl BST SW. That is the case for D, that they are spectator for D, is that you know, it's in fact the definition of characteristic polynomial, is that they are D-closed, so that's fine. And they are locally D-exact, so they are spectator, and that the fact that they are also spectator for the Weyl is related to this identity, so that if you take the curvature 2 form, the Riemann curvature 2 form to this some power, even power, take the trace, viewed as matrix trace, it's identical to the same where you replace the Riemann 2 form by the Weil 2 form. So from that identity, maybe it's no longer surprising that these are spectator for the descent, which means that they give rise to other conformal invariants then. So the result, in fact, is that from all the class 2 scalar densities that were found in the past by Friedman, Hahn, Dragon, Kreutzer, then Varnish, Hahn again, and Marquenot, in fact, all of them are Weil invariant. So they are all listed. I mean, this M of K there is related to the rank, to the Casimir of the algebra. So all that is known from its classification of the algebra homology of SO of Lorentz group. Okay. So now, just to finish, 1 or 2 minutes, we can play the game of, okay, say let's take the Lorentz-Chern-Simons Lagrangian in dimension 4p minus 1, view it as your density for your given field theory. Of course, it has no propagator. If you are in dimension higher than 3, put 3 and then 7, etc. In 3, this piece is a very important part of topologically massive gravity. When you add the Chern-Simons pieces to the Einstein Lagrangian in 3 dimensions. But now we also can consider in arbitrary dimension 4p minus 1 this scalar density integrated and have an action. So the other Lagrange derivative with respect to the metric gives the left-hand side of the field equation, which can be written in this form. Well, this is a density that is given exactly explicitly like that, where this bracket notation, it denotes the product of 2p minus 1 Riemann tensor, viewed as, I mean, antisymmetric 2 form valued in a matrix alpha beta. Will soon be finished. Okay. So because we have Weil and diffeomorphism invariance, we have 2 Noether identities associated to these 2 gauge transformations. The Noether identities for Weil transformation tells you that the trace of this tensor is identically 0, and the one for diffeomorphism tells you that the covariant divergence of this tensor density epsilon mu is also 0. So, okay. So for the second identity, I just mentioned that we have to use this other identity, which itself can be seen to be true by using Schouten identity and cyclicity of the trace. And then finally, another property, quite remarkable property of the other Lagrange derivative of the functional that I did before, is that if you lower one index with the metric, you have quantity, which is again a tensor density of strength 1, which is strictly Weil invariant. And there are not so many such quantity on the market. So the Weil tensor itself, in fact, is the most remarkable one. If you have one index up and 3 indices down, the Weil tensor is strictly Weil invariant. Here it's another quantity. It has a different structure, index structure, and it is strictly Weil invariant only in the dimension where it is defined, namely in dimension 4p minus 1, p being an integer. And okay, this can be checked to be true by rewriting differently this quantity on the previous slide, where again, actually you can replace the Riemann 2 form by the Weil 2 form. Because of the way they are contracted, it's identical to that. So from this form, it looks much more reasonable indeed that this quantity is strictly Weil invariant, although it's not absolutely trivial. Okay, so the last slide. To conclude, as a consequence of this decomposition of global conformal invariants are not in one-to-one correspondence with the conformal anomalies. Because indeed, if you multiply the Lorentz-Chern-Simons densities and the Lorentz-Chern-Simons densities wedged with characteristic classes of the Lorentz algebra, if you multiply all these guys, the class 2, by the Weil ghost, you don't get candidate consistent conformal anomaly. It was true that it was the case for the Gauss-Bonnet, so for the Euler term. So the Euler term is called G, epsilon, and then it's come to 2 form, let's say M of them, if you are in dimension, the Euler density in dimension 2M, which looks like that. This one is, we recovered the result that it is indeed a global conformal invariant. This is in class 1. That's the only one in class 1 which is global. If you multiply this Euler density by the Weil ghost, and if you integrate over the manifold of dimension 2m, then that gives a consistent Weil anomaly. But it's no longer true that if you take the Lorentz Chern-Simons densities, multiply them by Weil parameter, and integrate, you don't get an anomaly, a consistent Weil anomaly. So they are not in one-to-one correspondence. So there are many more, actually, conformal invariants than conformal anomalies. Because in cohomology, in ghost number 0, we have all this class that is not in ghost number 1. Okay, so this work generalizes the analysis devoted to the three-dimensional case, the topologically massive gravity by Desert Templeton and Peter van Nieuwenhuizen on the same time. It generalizes to arbitrary dimension, well, 4p minus 1, and it completes the result obtained by Alex Sakis, where all the classes with the Lorentz Chern-Simons had been evaluated. So maybe prospect for physics could be used these Lorentz Chern-Simons to have some high dimensional and high dimension space-time equivalent of topologically massive gravity. Why not? So this I know, and I stop here. Thank you.
Any questions for Nicolas?
What is the reason for this last? Why would you think that? Why would you think it gives you topologically massive gravity? You know the theory in quadratic approximation. How is that?
Okay,
Compare.
all I wanted to say is that for TMG, what you do is that you take the Einstein-Hilbert action, and then you add to it the integral in 3 dimensions, the integral of the Lorentz Chern-Simons in 3 dimensions. And so that's your action functional, and actually you put a 1 over mu here, where mu is mass dimension, and that gives you the field equation, G mu plus 1 over mu, the dual of the quantum tensor. 0, and this equation is interesting, it has many properties. Of course, the specific pattern that makes it particularly interesting is that it has a propagator. It has a piece which is quadratic plus something else. And obviously, all the ones I gave, they don't start with a quadratic term, they are higher order. So, but nevertheless, we could work in arbitrary dimension. That was just what I was suggesting. Take 4p minus 1 here, and then the power of the mass. Compensate, you get again an equation of motion which is g mu nu plus 1p on the root of g is epsilon mu nu that I define. And maybe this field equation has some interesting property. That's just all I wanted to say.
Right. Let's thank Nicolas for his series of lectures again, and let's return at 2:30.